welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed your tours around the facilities. I know we've got some fantastic sites. There's still a few that I've not been around properly, so I really hope you enjoyed your tour around. This is going to be our final session of the day. I hope you've all enjoyed the day so far. It's genuinely flown by, so it's so good to see so many people still ready to go and engaged. So this panel is going to focus on the space community. I'm delighted to be joined by Alan Cross, by Hugh Mortimer, by Jessica Brush, and by Joaquin Perez-Grande. I just want to invite each of you now, if you wouldn't mind, just to say a couple of words about how you got into the business, what your role covers, and how you relate to space community.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Alan Cross. I work for I look after the Northwest Space Cluster, so I'm based up at Daresbury. I've been with STFC for 8 years. Before I started in this role, I was the European Space Agency's Business Applications Ambassador for Northwest England and North Wales, again delivered through STFC. It's ironic that I'm speaking at an early stage career event for people who work in space, because I had no early stage career in space while you guys were studying at university. When I was at university, I learned to speak loudly and handle myself in a sword fight, because I went to drama school, and I came into the space sector when I was 35. So my role is to support the development of the space industry across the northwest of England. Many people, forgive me, south of Birmingham don't really know where that is. That means Cumbria, Lancashire, the Liverpool City region, Greater Manchester, and Cheshire and Warrington. So that's about 10% of the UK population and GDP.
Thanks, Alan. So, yeah, my name's Jessica Brush. I'm Cluster Development Officer, and I work on the same team as Alan and as Hugh, but I'm based here at Harwell campus. I've worked for STFC for just over 5 years now. I joined through the grad scheme in 2020 and completed that in 2022, and have been keeping on ever since. A lot of my role, a good part of my role focuses not only on space, but our other clusters as well: energy, health, quantum, and digital across Harwell and the Northwest. So I will support the cluster managers with visits, events, a range of sort of programs, networking, and a really large part of my role is helping to run grant funding programs that encourage either collaboration across the different clusters we have or within specific sectors where we identify a need. And before STFC, I studied aerospace engineering at Queen's University Belfast, which, despite the spacey name, wasn't a very spacey course, but alas, here I am. So, hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. My name's Hugh Mortimer, and like Alan and Jess, I work in the cluster team. This is the space community panel, and actually this represents, I think, our role in the STFC kind of community is to support all of the different organizations, the space organizations that we have on site, but also that we represent, I think, locally up in the Northwest. I have a slightly easier job than Alan because I am the Harwell Space Cluster Manager. And that means I look after and support the 700-acre site that we're sitting on right now, the 106 space organizations that we have. And that, for me, is super easy because it's basically a kind of a 1 square mile kind of area, while Alan has a much wider remit and kind of territory to cover. Mine is as joint appointments. So I'm actually 50% within RAL Space, our National Laboratory for Space Science, and 50% within the Space Cluster. I've had about 18 years at RAL Space, which has given me a really strong kind of connection to the space community and the work that we do here at STFC. And so I've had a really long kind of history of working in space-related projects and research with academic partners. The work that I'm doing now with the space kind of ecosystem within Harwell is really kind of connecting towards the private sector companies that we have on site. And quite a few of you are represented here today, but it's been a real steep learning curve since April. I've stepped into this role. So it really is a new way of actually having to communicate and bring partners together to understand the kind of the ecosystem and how we can support them.
Hi everyone, I'm Joaquin, as you can see on the screen. Space Ecosystem Manager at the Satellite Applications Catapult, so based just over the other side of the road, outside of the STFC campus. Job involves what it says on the tin. It's driving and growing the UK space ecosystem. So luckily, I get to work pretty much every day. In the case of Alan, I think I've seen you at like 5 meetings since Friday. Supporting the 14 UK space clusters. I think we'll get into that in just a second. But this work that we do in partnership with the UK Space Agency is all about growing the ecosystem. So it's connecting the different communities, stimulating capabilities, supporting businesses and academics to translate their ideas to the market and beyond. Been doing this for 2 years, and much like Alan, also not space per se by background, but biochemist. So definitely also a big champion for those transitioning from other non-traditional engineering backgrounds into the space sector. And yeah, it's all about the community, as I think we're gonna say a lot over the next 15 minutes or so. It's all about working with those stakeholders across government, academia, industry, ensuring they have a place for the communities in the space sector, and ensuring that anyone in the UK, where from the Highlands down to Cornwall, they have a local cluster manager they can tap into, and our role is just ensuring that they can do that the best they can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much all for your introductions. Now, I know I promised to stay on script, but I'm immediately going to go off script by starting with question 2, which is, there's been a lot of discussion about clusters, and I just wanted to highlight what is a cluster and what makes clusters successful in science and in space. If anyone particularly wants to start, go ahead.
Sure thing, we'll go that way. And I think this is very timely because it's definitely a bit of a buzzword now, and or hope. Actually, how many of you have heard of the word cluster or space cluster before being here? How many of you have heard of a cluster other than Hubble Space Cluster? Okay, actually, that's not the worst, but perhaps better than I imagined. As perhaps actually for those of you based in Harrow or even in other parts of the UK, you will have realized that clusters more than just co-locating a bunch of companies and a bunch of government agencies and departments and universities or research departments in some cases. It's really all about that network effect that gets formed and those spillover effects. It's about the capability, it's about the collaboration that that's driven between the partners and the identity, more importantly, that's formed as a result. So surely a successful cluster has that kind of critical mass, but it's also the narrative. Every cluster has a bit of a specialism, so to speak. I hope you will also have heard Scotland saying, well, Glasgow is the place where most satellites are manufactured in the world outside of California. Perhaps it's just something we don't talk about enough. But it's also about that connectivity that I imagine these people will refer to just in a minute. It's that connected tissue. You need a team that's there to convene, to coordinate, and to drive all of that activity. It can't happen on its own. So that's what the Catapult we're starting to refer to as the actively managed space clusters. There is people dedicated and driving all of that activity behind. And well, I suppose the reason why we're here and why the Catapult speaks to this quite a lot is because we've been driving these ecosystems since its foundations. So we set up, when the Catapult was set up in 2013, we quickly recognized that the space sector couldn't just be grown from Harrow. So we set up our Center of Excellence. That was 5 up to 2021. And that's what some of them evolved into space clusters when the space agency started funding them. Some new space clusters emerged as a result of that mix, and that's where we are today in that landscape of 14 cluster managers across the UK with a team behind them in some cases. And then, well, we've got someone driving that activity and really ensuring that there is that connection. Because at the end of the day, it really has to be some sort of community that gets shaped and that actually makes it true that the sum is really greater than just the parts on their own.
I think we're all probably going to say the same thing. It's about the community. It's in the title again. It's echoing what Sarah Beardsley said this morning about we're in space because it's, there are some very exciting projects and there are some really amazing outputs from the projects that we work on. But actually the thing that keeps us here and that drives all of the activity and effort are the people. And this is our responsibility. And it's kind of a big responsibility is to try and make that connective tissue, the glue that brings everyone together as an active managed cluster, is to kind of forge that community of practice, to bring people together in a way that supports greater than the sum of the parts, right? And that's what we can offer as actively supporting the groups, the ecosystem that we have available to us. As I said, Alan's got a much harder job because he's trying to connect across massive landscapes, geographical landscapes. It's, I think, hard even within Harwell, because we've got such diversity, we've got such breadth of what we do, and to bring people out of their kind of narrowly focused activities of delivering whatever you're delivering and bring you into a wider community, it's a difficult task, but it showcases what we can actually achieve together if we kind of start working across our interdisciplinary areas, which is why we have a cluster team that supports not just space within Harwell. We have one that supports healthcare, energy, quantum. We have a regional cluster that supports defense and security. And that just showcases the breadth of what we've got on site, which also highlights the fact that the reason that clusters exist is to kind of share kind of the national capabilities, the infrastructure that we have. And that's another thing that enables us to co-locate capabilities in certain locations, is this center of gravity based around core capabilities. But it really does come down to the same thing. We're working with people. We're trying to get the best out of the organizations that we have.
Yeah, there's very little left to say about what makes a successful cluster at this point, because I totally agree with both Hugh and Joaquin. The only other thing I can add as well is, at least through our clusters here at Harwell, another thing that makes a cluster successful is access to funding as well. Here at STFC, one of the calls I help run is the Cross Cluster Proof of Concept Fund, which isn't just space focused, but kind of runs across the clusters. And I know, Alan, your cluster is involved in some sort of more regional funding, which you could probably speak to better than I could. But I think it's a very, as well as that networking and relationship building aspect, the access to money at the end of the day is also very important to the organization.
Thank you. One of the critiques I often hear about clusters is, why are you splitting everything up? Why does everyone kind of guard their own thing? Why can't you just work together? And the truth is that, I mean, that's a utopia. It was never like that. I came into the cluster side of things 10 years ago, before people were really talking about clusters. It was a hobby of mine. I wasn't getting paid for it, but I was working in Liverpool, and the city region was talking about growing its advanced engineering manufacturing economy. It was talking about growing its digital economy. So was Lancashire, so was Manchester. Meanwhile, you had Space Agency talking about growing the space economy. And I was saying, okay, Space Agency, are you talking to the people who literally build stealth fighters in Lancashire, or nuclear submarines, all of Britain's nuclear submarines in Cumbria, or the people who invented graphene in Manchester? No, why would you do that? Right, okay. And then I was saying to the people locally, you want to grow this stuff? Are you looking at space? What for? There was no link up there, that was the beginning of my journey. And so the space clusters, the 14 or so space clusters that now exist, haven't been imposed. It's not been carved up, right? You can't talk to them anymore. Quite the opposite. It's been self-organized. They've emerged. It's become a way, from my perspective, certainly, to bring in those companies and those organizations, those researchers who just wouldn't have any way to talk to anyone in the space agency, in RAL space, anywhere. For them, space is brand new. They have no idea how it works. And so the clusters enable them to have that connection and to start that journey. And for those companies who are already established in space, you help them realize they're not alone. For 53 years, the European Space Tribology Laboratory has been based in Warrington. Bits of the Hubble Space Telescope, Mars rovers, International Space Station had to go to Warrington to be tested before they went into space. Who knew that? See? And no one in Warrington knows that. And the people who run the ESTLs didn't know there was anyone next door who was doing space. So it's about creating those connections, sometimes where they don't exist and sometimes where they do exist, and strengthening them, and making sure that national and international levels are aware of capabilities at a local level. But making sure that those local decision makers know that there's an opportunity in space, and making sure that they've got those connections and scale them up as well. Fantastic.
Thank you all for your answers on that. In terms of the communities that the clusters support, in terms of the communities that you support, what particularly do you think the UK performs well at in the space community? What are the UK's strongest contributions to the UK, to the international community, should I say, rather than the UK community?
I'm always going to come back to what was my current crusade, which is space nuclear. I think we've got a real opportunity with nuclear systems in space. In the Northwest specifically, some of the nuclear waste at Sellafield is turning into americium-241 instead of americium-243, the way we treated it initially before it was buried. We've now shown that that can be used as in place of plutonium to power deep space missions. So British-built radioisotope power systems will run the Rosalind Franklin rover at the end of this decade, and they will power the Argonaut missions from Lisa to the moon in the next decade. No one else can do that. No one else can use americium in that way. Currently, the only countries who can do nuclear in space are really America and Russia, a little bit of China, a little bit of India. But that would enable, if we need, that would enable the UK to become, to really carve out something very unique for itself on the global stage.
I'm going to answer this question a little differently because it's not really within my job role to be exposed to one key really interesting area that I could tell you, but I'll be a wee bit meta and say almost how we are organized means that the UK is strong in a lot of areas, both technology-wise and geographically, you know, through our clusters and through our CC and our connected capability networks. It means that, you know, we frequently have delegations from abroad come to our campus. If you get Americans here, you can take a guess that they are probably from Southern California, Florida, possibly Colorado or Texas. They're massive space hubs. Whereas a wee bit like we said at the start, there is no key area in the UK where you can claim is the only space place. I mean, I think a lot of people would like to try. A lot of people can claim that they have expertise in a key area. But I think the fact now that from literally the rural north of Scotland right down to Cornwall, from Northern Ireland to the east of England, that there are people working expertise everywhere. I mean, for example, I am from Northern Ireland. I was educated there, and there was very little going on. However, in the 5 years since I've graduated, the amount of space expertise in such a small region has just increased massively based on, you know, past strength in the aerospace sector in particular. And I think the fact that the UK on a broad geography is a powerhouse is a sort of unique strength and a strong capability that it can bring internationally, just to look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, thanks. So our government likes to try and claim things like we are a global superpower in science. And I think that's slightly disingenuous because I think because of the small amount of funding that gets distributed very widely, it is our strength that the fact that we do such a broad range of work, and I do completely agree. But it means that we aren't necessarily kind of a global superpower, right? But I think there are some very key areas that we do definitely lead the world in. I think that's the kind of terminology we need. Climate change research, for example, our environmental monitoring capabilities, our links to weather forecasts and climate monitoring are world leading. We are definitely punching above our weight. I think in small satellite development and technologies, we know that in Scotland, in Surrey Satellites, we are leading the world in actually developing and delivering kind of small scale satellite systems. I think our startup capability in the UK is phenomenal. It's the reason the European Space Agency has invested the European Space Agency Incubation Centre, ESA-BIC, here in the Harwell. It's the reason we have, and it does really. We have the ESA Phi Lab as well to really help support the scale up. And I think we are really world leading in helping support startup businesses. Unfortunately, I don't think we do a great job of then turning them into the kind of unicorn businesses that go on to become like the Planet Labs of the world, the SpaceX of the world. But I think that really demonstrates we've got a huge breadth of capability and an entrepreneurship kind of spirit. And then I think there's one thing about the actual shared infrastructure. So one of the core things, and I think it comes back down to this breadth of skills, showcases what we have here at Harwell, which is this range of capabilities, infrastructure which is shared across multiple discipline areas. So within Diamond, I'm sure you saw that they do all sorts of incredible research, from looking at protein structures, looking at the kind of sample returns from Mars, all the way through to measuring the kind of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Being able to do that in a single facility is incredible. Being able to do that across 15 international facilities that are based here at Harwell, and being able to then connect the ecosystem from space, energy, nuclear, and quantum is just phenomenal. I think that's a range of connectivity. Because of our potentially lack of funding, we're punching above our weight. We're having to spread our funding thin, makes us have to work more innovatively and pushes us above and beyond where actually we should be in a global ecosystem.
I'm sure there's much I can add to that, because I think I agree completely. And just to put some numbers to some of that, which brings me to my point, is the latest Science and Health study, which is what Space Agency uses to determine how much the UK space sector's growth is worth. It says 19 billion. We definitely believe that to be an underestimate. But if you were to put in terms of value added to the economy, that's over 400 billion. So if satellites were all to fall one day randomly, it would be over 1 billion lost every single day that's up for the UK, just for the UK alone. And again, that is just modeling from a couple of numbers. So space is tremendously important for the UK, and I think that's certain advantage. It can also be quite dangerous when it comes to sustained funding and things like that. But I think ultimately it translates into the unique thing that the space sector brings to the UK, which is that ability to translate it into real world value. It's really about the applications in the UK. You were referring to some of that climate monitoring and disaster management, rural connectivity in Wales. We've seen and supported lots of projects in that, sovereign capabilities such as nuclear, and also defense, which is of course quite important nowadays. So while you see a lot of countries perhaps focusing on one of those segments from space, where they are like going all in on launch or in orbit capabilities or in kind of the enabling infrastructure and manufacturing, I think we do a lot of that, but it's all about that integration, that kind of additional layer that truly makes it an end-to-end supply chain that we can do in the UK, and that not every country can. So definitely thanks to a lot of that kind of operating environment, which is quite healthy despite some of that low levels of funding. So Space Agency is really strong with some of the unlocking space for government program. So unlocking space for government, for business, and for investment. So different programs, they have to kind of really stimulate the market, because ultimately it does come down to government demands. And that will always be kind of one of the main customers for so many of these people. But also programs such as one that we were discussing with Alan earlier, the Space Ecosystem Commercialization Program. So this is taking companies that may have an idea or maybe don't even operate in space yet, and giving them funding so they can truly realize that. And again, taking that place-based approach, if that was to be coordinated or delivered nationally, you wouldn't really be able to tailor to the requirements of a locality. That's the whole point of having a cluster, is people that truly understand the community. So all of that collectively, I think it truly showcases that it's just doing that end-to-end supply chain in a way that makes sense for the different localities of the UK, and that all together paints a really good picture that honestly I haven't seen anywhere else in Europe and beyond.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you. So with all of your experiences and opportunities that you've had working within the space communities, are there any potential pitfalls in working in these large communities, large collaborations? And do you have any advice to avoid those for people that are looking into getting into the space community?
I'm not entirely sure how many of them, if I'm to start again now, are just attributed to space, but I certainly agree that in space is a system, and you really have to take a systems approach. And when you do that, what happens is that it just becomes truly complex. Yet collaboration is essential. So I think usually it's all about incentives or people not aligned. So researchers perhaps just pursuing their publications, whereas businesses, especially nowadays, are just actually chasing salaries and the money to kind of keep the lights on. You have a lot of duplication sometimes, and that again comes down to perhaps us having to do even a better job and ensuring that people talk to each other and they are communicative. Because there's no point in two people spending the funding on doing the same thing or kind of tackling the same problem with no coordination at all. So I think there is a lot of that too. But everything with relationships is also about trust and building those connections. So it doesn't happen from one day to the other. And it's often as important to manage some of those external relationships as well as internally. There are loads of big organizations in space, Space, STFC, Space Agency, even the Catapult. There are loads of people, everyone with different interests and everyone covering perhaps a specific segment within space. But there is a lot of coordination to be made. But I think there is also, and that links into a bit of trust building as well. So you really have to develop a healthy relationship, especially when you consider the time scale that some space projects take. We're not talking a couple of months or even a year in a very kind of consultancy style or traditional industries. These are programs that can last for decades, and actually you only see the impact of those, of how will we transform into what it is today, now 50 years later. So that is the only point where you see those results. But you need to have some bit of that faith and that trust. It's not just kind of chasing the contract. It's really building those relationships time and time again, which again goes back to the whole point of the building that community and ensuring that everyone feels represented within that.
I think one of the big pitfalls and a big learning from coming from kind of the academic sector into the kind of commercial sector and looking at the interface between those two is actually the cultural differences between how academia behaves and the kind of timescales and mentality and thoughts and the reasons people in academia do research, and the difference between the culture and motivations in the private sector. And I often hear like kind of people in private sector saying, "Oh, kind of they're really lazy in academia. You know, they're not delivery focused. They'll never deliver anything on time. They don't care if it doesn't get used." And that's not true. There are different motivations and there are different expertise and there are different ways of communicating. But there's a third element to that, and that's government. And that they're completely, they're a complete entity to themselves, but they're a really important entity because they drive a lot of the direction in space. They're a user in space, they're intelligent and understand space. But to actually connect academia, industry, and government into one ecosystem that delivers effectively for everybody is so difficult because everyone's got a different priority and a different motivation. And the pull and the push between those three is so difficult to manage. But I think the only way to get around that is the communication element, is to kind of really make sure that everybody is on the same page by making sure everyone is talking to one another. There was one other thing I was going to mention. It's just fallen out of my head.
That's okay.
But we'll keep on it. Oh, that was it. It's mis-selling. And this is something I see quite often in Earth observation. And it goes back many decades, back to the 70s, when Earth observation was coming up with new techniques to observe the Earth system, and then saying, look what we can do. Look at the observations that we can make. We can now answer all of your questions. Agriculture, farmers, we can tell you what you've got in your field, or policymakers, we can tell you where all your ships are and what's happening. The overselling of what Earth observation or space can do can often be a massive detriment to the other sectors when we under-deliver for what we can achieve. So being realistic and actually being scientifically driven, leaning into the academic side, means that we can actually sell what we can actually sell rather than overselling. And I think that's really important because a lot of the people who come to space don't often know about space. We're the informed community. We're the people who know what our technologies can do. People just see space and get overwhelmed by the excitement of the fact that they're doing something in space. They might be the people investing, they may be the people buying the products from space. So we have to be really careful about how we communicate what we can do and what we can't do, and making sure that we are working with partners all of the way to make sure that we build that trust all the way together. And I think, but again, it comes down to communication.
I don't think I have anything to add on that one, just because
That's absolutely fine.
I know
That's
we have other
absolutely
questions
fine.
coming on, so I'll pass on just in case Alan needs to in the meantime.
I mean, and really comprehensive answers there. You reminded me when about expectations and what we can and can't do. When Google Earth came out, yes, I'm that old. When Google Earth came out, we showed it to my mate's mum, and she immediately screamed and ran out because she thought someone had stole the car, and we had to explain, "No, Bernadette, it's not in real time." Don't worry. But yeah, you're right. I think the other side of the coin there is, look, you're in space because you're passionate about space. I'll be honest with you, very few sectors have the kind of passion that we have for our sector. People enjoy it, but when people like space, we're up the wall with it, right? We are, and you all know. So you've got to be careful how just because you think something's really cool, and it's, especially if you've gone a few years specializing, you've gone down the road to the project and you just think it's amazing and everyone's got to use it, doesn't necessarily mean that that is the case. So just temper your own expectations sometimes. And remember, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face, right? Everyone's got a plan, but no plan survives contact with reality. So you have to be willing from day one to roll with the punches and to communicate, to listen, to build trust, and make sure that you're reacting to reality around you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I do have a couple more questions, but I think at this point, I'm going to open it to the floor. So if I can invite Joe and Jesse to come and grab some microphones, please. We'll come back to those final two just to close on.
That thing that you throw.
We don't have the cube. Charlie, do we have the cube?
Release the cube.
We have the cube. Right. That's going to wake some people up. There we go.
For me, if you've got absolutely no sporting acumen,
we may only need one microphone and a cube, but you can be on cube retrieval duty in case something goes wrong. Because I'm sure, as we all know, physicists and engineers all make the finest sportsmen. So it's okay if we don't have the cube, Charlie.
While he's working out the cube, shall we just...
Yes, let's. Okay. Do we have any questions from the floor while we get the cube sorted? Joe, do you want to go to that one, please? Thank you.
Hi, you've kind of answered this a tiny bit, but growing up in Wales, it definitely felt like we were a part of the UK that was left behind in a lot of the new technological advancements, for instance, with like 4G and all of those things. And I was wondering how much work you're doing to make sure that the entirety of the UK is being included, and that, you mentioned a bit about rural areas in Wales getting communication systems, but how important is it to have a combined UK approach to all of these new advancements that space can allow us to have?
Tremendous question. The clusters are a huge part of that. I say this every time, I'm from Kirby in Liverpool, which is technically in Knowsley in Liverpool, and Knowsley is the only place in the UK you cannot be educated past GCSE. Did you know that place existed? Did you know that there was a place in Britain where there are 140,000 people live there? There are no provisions to be educated past GCSE. You have to leave. It is one of the most economically deprived places in the UK, one of the least ethnically diverse as well. So I quite proudly represent that. Although the head of engineering from Sky Aurora is also from Kirby, so we're doing something like that. You're right. I think this is why the clusters are so important, because we know those local nuances, right? We know where the not spots are for Wi-Fi and connectivity. We know where the communities are that's been left behind, in a way that if you were to speak to Whitehall, they wouldn't know. They can't know. It's not how the world works. So we do work very actively. I work very closely with local community colleges to try and make sure that those students are aware of that. And the Institute of Technology for Greater Manchester works with a lot of these local further education colleges. I'm speaking at their conference in December. So this is work that goes on across all 14 clusters. It's not perfect. We can always do better. But I think we're doing a lot better than we were 5 years ago.
Yeah, and if I can add something to that, because I spoke briefly about being, again, I'm not from a rural area, but from a slightly more cut off part of the UK, using Northern Ireland as an example, and how the clusters impact in multiple ways. So I know there is a sort of a public science board there called Matrix, and they've recently published a report on 5G and connectivity within Northern Ireland, and particularly within rural areas. And the space cluster there has kind of been involved in that. So that's one aspect, that's practical technology that will affect an area. There's also the kind of business aspect in that clusters in any of these areas, are giving opportunities for businesses, be that startups, businesses and incubators, or the larger primes that maybe are working in multiple sectors to give the access to funding, the access to networking, the access to training and events. And then the third thing is students, universities, education. So again, I'll go back to using Northern Ireland as an example. When I left Queen's University Belfast, there was no extracurricular space things going on at the time. Whereas now, through the interest and local businesses doing more work in space through the help of the Northern Ireland Space Cluster, Queen's now has a really competitive rocketry society, as well as access to more career opportunities to do internships, to do placements and graduate roles. So a lot of this, and I'm sure the clusters can't take full credit, but has been driven by, by this involvement. And it's important to take that kind of multi-pronged approach to get people into the sector, but they actually show this isn't all talk, something's actually happening, this will impact your life, sort of thing. If that makes sense, does that answer your question a little bit?
No, the only insight I have is that I worked within central government on secondment for about 18 months. So I sat within our Department of Science, Innovation and Technology in the Space Directorate, which is where policy and strategy gets formed. And it was really interesting. I do highly recommend, if you get the opportunity to go on secondment into the civil service, give it a go, especially with the knowledge you come back to your job, because that can give you that like security blanket. It kind of feels as though the turbulent nature of what happens in Whitehall means that you need the opportunities to come back. The stress faces on the civil service. But there is a kind of a view that they do want to make sure that all of the devolved nations are actually included in strategies and policies. But there's not much that I think is physically being done to proactively push funding to those devolved administrations in a way that is meaningful. I know the people at Space Forge, for example, in using the Welsh example, they're very proud to be the main representation of what's happening in the space community in Wales. Where you look at the economic value that's happening in Wales around space, it's Space Forge, right? And I think there's pride, but there's also frustration there. But there's also, coming back, I think it is in the universities where there are some really key capabilities that are impacting and being developed and being kind of implemented into space agencies and space programs around the world that we really don't hear about. There is a Cardiff University professor, kind of a group that is developing all of the filters, all of the narrowband filters that go onto almost all of the space missions around the world. You just don't hear about it, right? This is a really key capability. In fact, it's almost a single point failure for the whole space community. There's one dude who's making all of the filters.
He's exhausted.
If he gets knocked over by a bus, we're kind of screwed. But these things are happening in our universities and we don't really know about it. And we do need to kind of cherish them and promote what we've got going on. But you're right, it's difficult.
I'll chip in as well, since we're at it. So to your point, so for example, at the Catapult, I was talking about the 14 clusters. Seems like a lot for one person. It's actually two of us. So effectively, I actually look after the both administrations. More than half of my time is literally ensuring that Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales have a place in space. And while surely there's a lot yet to do, following that place-based approach that Alan was mentioning, there is examples of it being driven. And again, there is nothing new here. The UK Space Conference 2019 was in Newport, and that brought together 2,000 people to talk about this. There has been a Welsh space strategy since 2015. That's before the National Space Strategy, which was 2021, the UK National Space Strategy. Taking an example of something practical that's happening, Space Agency gave to each devolved administration £300,000 to kind of on top of the normal cluster funding to spend on what they saw fit for their place. So, for example, Northern Ireland has taken on a lot of public sector government education. Scotland's taking kind of a different approach, working with a working group, which is something we are supporting them on. And Space Wales has been able to also tailor that further to look at rural connectivity, which is something we're also working with them on, and to give some small pots of funding to some companies to advance the world space strategy again. So I think there are examples of that kind of devolution in terms of funding being given so that the solutions can be tailored to the local challenges as opposed to someone from Whitehall assuming what the UK-wide challenge is. But again, all of that's connected back. And I think there are organizations like us, STFC, Space Agency, and also the wider cluster network that really make that happen in a coordinated way. It's over 70 companies that we've identified so far that are operating in the Welsh space sector, and those numbers are growing every day. So there is a lot of momentum, and again, we've been picking on Wales for like the past 55 minutes, but we could have done this with any cluster in the UK. There is a lot to talk about that we simply don't, and I think it's actually our collective duty to do so, our collective job to do so.
Thank you very much. Let's take another question from the floor. Additionally, if there's anyone in particular that you'd like to ask the question to, feel free to mention that, but obviously others can chip in as well. So we've got questions from Josh.
Lou. Just a follow-on point from the point about government. Do you foresee the UK Space Agency being absorbed into DSIT having a significant impact on the space sector, or will it just be business as usual?
Yeah, I do, and I hope it does, because I do think that the space sector in the UK needs shaking up. I think what we've seen to date is, I'm being frank and brutally honest here, inefficiencies across how we deliver our space for our space sector, and I think that's not just me saying that or my opinion, but actually there's been several reviews of the space community from different levels, from the National Audit Office. There's been a ministerial review, there was a geospatial review, and we're just coming to the end of a House of Lords inquiry into space, and we've seen a lot of evidence being given to government on how our kind of different departments are delivering, different agencies are delivering for space. And I think UKRI is one of those agencies, the kind of who we represent, I think, and Innovate UK and Catapult. I think we're seeing it from the Space Agency as well, European Space Agency. How our ecosystem actually functions is based on the governance and the regulations and the policies and the strategies that are set out, and are then we're meant to then help deliver. And I think it's for us over the next 2 months, because this is where there's evidence gathering happening at government, for us to kind of communicate to government how we would like it to be seen, how we'd like it to be set up for us. So just to let you know that in March of next year, that they're implementing all of the things that they found from the evidence and then the redesign of the structure. They're hoping to put in place this new structure between DSIT and Space Agency, which will be known as the UK Space Agency, but will sit within government. They want to implement that in April. So I do hope it does make change. I do think it will be a positive change for the community. That's quite political. That's quite a civil service.
Yes, it's a very good question. It's good. Any other comments from anyone else on that at all? That's absolutely fine. Yasmin, is there anything online at all? That's okay. Yes, Jesse, if you could jump on please. We'll take a couple more from the floor, and then I'll just do 1 or 2 more just to wrap up.
Yeah, it's sort of a follow-on question from that one actually, but what are your feelings about the cabinet reshuffle and the fact that sort of the leadership of DSIT's changed? Is that disappointing for you, or do you think it's an opportunity?
Again, bit of an insight, especially being in the space sector for so long. It's just natural. It's just natural course of evolution. We will get change of administrations, and it's how our civil service works that we'll get new ministers in regularly, and then it's up to the different communities to brief the ministers, to inform them about how space happens and to make sure they understand the importance and the impact of space. I think you get to a point where it's like, oh, there's another one, right? Here we go, we've got to do it again. But it's just how the civil service works. We're quite lucky that our new minister for space, who has the portfolio, actually comes from Leicester. So she's the minister at MB for Leicester. This is the DSIT minister. So she understands that space, the space part in Leicester is part of her constituency. She understands the impact of space, and so she has a good understanding. So I'm quite pleased we've got that in the background. But it's just natural. It's just how it works. You just have to get on with it.
Any other thoughts?
No problem. Okay, we'll go for another question from the floor.
So I believe in your field of work, you are exposed to many different space projects, ideas, fields of research. So what's, from your point of view, in the next, say, 10 years would be the areas in space field and space research that would see the most grow? Or what would be this emerging or currently developing fields or big things that will appear there?
I think everyone's going to have something to say on this one. Well, very first one, I think goes back to some of the points we were discussing, and it's anything that interfaces with space that it's not space. So I think we've developed as a sector the foundations of how space works, and this next 10 years, this next decade, it's all about the applications that emerges. The ones that I'm most excited about, it's all about the innovative economy, manufacturing and microgravity, whether that's advanced materials. We're talking about Space Forge, but you also have BioOrbit, been named one of the, so by the Future 50 report, as the only space company featured there as a potential unicorn within the next 10 to 15 years. So, and they do crystals in orbit. So, well, they crystallize proteins in orbit. I've worked with Diamond. We're funded through a funding call that we run with Alan and the team. I think there is a lot of potential there in terms of that, but also the wider in orbit economy from a sustainability perspective. There'll be a lot of talk around reorbiting satellites, refueling, servicing, Orbit Hub team. Highlight to all of you up there. I think we will see a lot of that, and also it's not just about what's trending or what will be out there in the next 10 years, but also what the UK can lead in. And I think these things that I've just highlighted are a strong testament to that, because we have a lot of that capacity, a lot of those regulations in place or being drafted, as boring as it is. And all of that compliance that actually it's just setting an example for so many other countries to follow. And more importantly, a strong industrial base in so many of those sectors that can directly benefit from space applications. That's, to me, the biggest.
I know what I was going to say. I think you mentioned it before, but because I'll leave that because I do think it's a higher growth opportunity for us. Talking about kind of government's focus, growth is the main one that you're really pushing. They're looking at supporting the economic stability of the UK. I'm going to mention two areas that I really am passionate about that I think will be transformational. And one is on the use of the new space kind of technologies for Earth observation and delivering new services above and beyond the traditional ones that we have. I think the biggest growth area, the ones that have the biggest impact for us as humanity on the ground, are the ones that enable us to make huge observations and change those into application areas. So it's that observations to applications, information that we can then use to make huge changes to our society. There's not one part of space that doesn't have a giant impact on one of our kind of sustainable development goals, kind of the global challenge areas. That's climate change, food security, water security. They're all underpinned by observations from space. But space alone is very, very rarely as a sole solution. So it has to be underpinned by other observations, assimilated data, ground-based sensor networks, and also kind of bringing it together with the data in kind of assimilation. All of this is required. This end-to-end system approach is required to turn some of these amazing observations into insights that we can make changes. And we are very, very quickly getting to a system that's integrated, overlaid with AI, whether that's agentic or whether that's LLMs. We are really getting to a point where we can turn some of these insights into some of these observations into incredible insights. That's one. The second one is a little bit more kind of somber, which is around the use of space for resilience and our own security. And we're seeing it more and more, this push to enable space and defense to come together to deliver our own security on the ground. And I think we're in a geopolitical context, a situation where we really need to think hard about what we're doing and how it contributes to national security. I think it's the way it's happening. We're seeing massive defense budgets increasing with decreasing in civil budgets. And I think we're looking at trying to align those budgets to enable us to still do the kind of high, exciting, really high impact work that we do on a day-to-day basis, but in a way that also supports national security. And I think that's one of the areas that we have to be focused on.
You. So I don't have any fresh answers because I'm the third person to go, but I will echo in particular what Joaquin said around the in space assembly and manufacturing being such a fascinating area, particularly in the next 10 years, which was the specific of your question. I think, I mean, I know I recognize I'm speaking to different people who are really interested in space, I assume. But I think when you're looking at sort of business cases, use cases, to show the general public, to show people who are not space focused, when you can take something like the microgravity testing, using life sciences and medicine manufacture and testing in space, I think people understand a lot easier how space can have an effect on their life. So I'm particularly keen on developments in that area. So not a lot to add there.
In violent agreement with everyone, really. I think AI, and I can't believe it's only just now that we've mentioned that in the proceedings. Yeah, the way AI will revolutionize the data architecture, our ability to analyze imagery, but also, the way that we produce new materials here on Earth that then aim to create the sensors. There's a whole value chain that AI will have on that. And at the core of that, I hope, would be the way that we measure, monitor, manage, and mitigate climate change is key to that. And in orbit service and assembly manufacturing. Right now, every single pound that is spent in space is spent on Earth. It is made on Earth and it is spent on Earth. And 10 years' time, that won't be the case. There will be economic activity happening in orbit, where the money is generated in orbit, and frankly, it stays in orbit. And that has flowed down to us. I would say I like to think that I'm about 15 years older than you. I'm probably about 20 years older than you in truth. 20 years ago, had I not been speaking loudly and handling myself in a sword fight, if I'd have gone down the science route and been a graduate like yourselves, people would have sat there and said, you've got the world at your feet. And I say to you guys now, you do not have the world at your feet. 20 years from now, you'll have 3. You'll have Earth, Moon, and Mars. So get stuck in.
Thank you very much. Great answers.
We're going to close the floor for the time being. I just want to finish off with a couple of questions. The first one of which is about measuring the impacts that those early career staff have on the space community at different levels. Where do we benefit local and local and internationally, and how can we measure that impact? I guess we could start with Jessica with that one. That's okay.
Okay.
Well, let's start in the middle for a change.
I think it's quite a hard one to answer. Possibly I was thinking hard data is where to start. I feel like every conference I go to in the sector usually has a panel dedicated to early careers, and getting people into the sector. And sometimes you just start to get a little bit frustrated that it's the same questions, the same conversations every time, and you just don't know where the needle has moved in the in-between. So I think having been able to demonstrate that impact with data is important. I know STFC is a good example of this, and there's other companies on Harvard campus who do put their money where their mouth is and have hired really big cohorts of graduates. So just how many early careers jobs would you support and be that graduate, or that kind of first 5 to 10 years of a career would be sort of an important thing. And then just how you share and communicate that impact. I appreciate in this room, there's probably a lot of different professions here. We probably have engineers, physicists, various business support roles. So there's not really one cohesive organization. It's likely that every person in this room is a part of. There'll be the kind of science and engineering bodies. There is space-focused groups. So it's a little fragmented, but at the same time, sometimes you see events where, things are run together, and there's just different ways of publicizing success that people have had in early career research, in early career job roles, or just 2 stars starters for 10, I guess, in terms of showing impact, demonstrating impact. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on that one.
Definitely do, and probably just as an example, are any of you familiar with someone that was probably sitting on this very same room 13 years ago that's now the chief operating officer of a $2 billion worth company? That was Alex, the CCO of OpenCosmos, who went through the space placements in industry program while he was at university doing a master's in the UK. He took an internship at Rao Space in summer 2013. And 2 years later, after a brief stint at ESA, he went up and founded OpenCosmos. Again, a company that has 6 offices around Europe and a $2 billion pipeline in terms of orders. And it's just the basic successful example that I'm sure Hugh uses in some slides every now and then, along with other stuff for sure. But I think that just summarizes the power of us, early career. I'm definitely not older than you. Actually, there's a chance that some of you are older than I am. It's truly, and I'm sure I have absolutely no clue what Alex did right, but I'm sure that some of the things that he did was just getting himself out there, talking to people, coming to events like this, ensuring that he was building the right network, that he was embedding into kind of some of those circles, and always looking for those things that needed to be solved. If the space sector was small in 2013, the Catapult was barely around. And actually that was our first space business industry cohort. But it's really not that bigger now. 12 years later, it's still a place where anything can have a huge impact. From small organizations, startups, on the side research, we have so many tools at our disposal nowadays. It's so easy and yet so difficult to just get something off the ground. So I think it's just doing things. There is a lot to do. And every little thing that one can do will contribute to that and will impact yourselves, the sector, and your careers moving forward.
I'll just add one thing, because I think the question is really difficult, because it's measuring impact is just difficult. And I think the community we're talking to you guys, I don't think it's meaningful. That makes sense. I'm going to turn this on its head, because
that's okay.
I think the question should be, how do we help you guys to deliver the impact that you want to be, or the impact that you want to deliver, right? And I think that's the important thing for us, because you've all got your own aspirations, your own goals. I'm pretty sure you've got an annual job plan, right, that you've got to do for your work, and you've got to kind of fulfill certain goals. But then in your 5-year, 10-year ambition, which you probably don't write down, it's for us, I think, as a community, to support you to become the next Alex's, but more than that, because I think space isn't a discipline in itself, right? Space is a thematic area. The reason it's a cluster is because space can involve the engineering, the physics, and the astronauts, but it can also involve policymakers and lawyers and accountants and material scientists and geologists, and the whole spectrum of space can be explored in all of the community that we kind of work within. And it's for us to kind of support you to deliver the impacts that you want to deliver to go forward. So I think the question should be, how do we support you to deliver impacts, rather than how do we measure the impacts that you generate?
That's absolutely fine.
And following on from what Hugh said, I come with wonderful news. The Space Skills Alliance measures quite a lot of this and suggests that the early stage careers is so oversaturated. So many people wanted to get to space from university, but you guys are here already. So there's a lot. You guys have got over a huge barrier already. For every one of you sat here, there's probably hundreds of people who desperately wanted to get in but didn't get that far. And the other good news is that what the Space Skills Alliance also shows is that whilst the early careers is really oversubscribed, mid-career is a desert. There are so many challenges in recruiting people at mid-career level right now. So if you're coming through now, you've got over that huge barrier. You're in the pipeline. You're being pulled into a vacuum ahead of you. So if you spend your time now trying to upskill yourself, trying to make sure that you are ready for this 5-10 year advancement. Where will you be? I think there's the world is your oyster. You've got 3 at your fingertips, as I said before. It's rich pickings for you, because right now in front of you, there's a real challenge with recruiting those mid-career levels.
Thank you all very much. Just finally, is there any advice that you'd like to share with the conference, with the delegates, that would benefit people that want to make an impact in the space community? Any final thoughts that you have?
This is completely left field. It comes down to communication, okay? What I've just said there about middle management and moving forward in your career, take any opportunity you can to do stuff like this, to sit in front of crowds and talk. For most people, it is the most frightening thing they can ever do. And the better you can get at it, the better placed you are, because most people don't want to do it. If you can do it, it puts you ahead. That being said, for the love of humanity, English is a wonderful language, a combination of Romantic and Germanic, influences from Nordic, Celtic, South Asia. Stop saying super. I cannot say this strongly enough. Super cool, super busy. Oh, that was super interesting. That was super slow. That's really super. But everyone does it all the time. I think young people are the worst for it. And forgive me, it makes you sound like a drooling idiot. Use better words. If someone asks you something, if you're running a meeting, don't say, oh, that's super interesting. We're just going to move super quick and otherwise we'll finish super late. Other words exist. That's my advice.
I shall be watching these recordings back and handing my notice in if it's appeared during the day.
No, I think that's incredibly valid, actually, especially in the public sector when you find the same phrases and words are used over and over again. So I can appreciate that one as well. A question I actually wanted to check with the audience is, so out of all of you, are you all working in the space sector now, or are some of you interested in working, but you're students or you're in adjacent? Like, if anyone who does work in the space sector can put your hand up, because my advice would be different. And anyone who wants to, but isn't currently. Okay. So I give some advice, I guess, to you first, because I think it touches on what Alan said, in that I reckon it is quite an intense time to be joining any workforce, but particularly the space sector, because it can feel like it is incredibly oversubscribed. I was approached by a student at a conference, a PhD student at a conference recently, who told me that to get onto their university's rocketry team, that they needed to do multi-stage interviews, which for an extracurricular to be at that stage is it's quite wide to be at that competitive level. So to echo what Alan already said about the fact that mid-career is a bit of a desert, if you do not succeed in immediately getting into a space role, do not stress, do not worry about it. Whatever experience you're building, be that scientific, engineering, or in business communications-based roles, it is also applicable in the space sector, and you can change, you can work into. I know someone who works in another very competitive industry, Formula One, and a lot of people who go into that industry have all the extracurriculars. They've done Formula Student, really shiny CVs, but the other half of them went and worked in another sector first and had real world experience. So that's first a word of encouragement, is that you do not have to immediately get right in to the space sector. And generally, for those who are already there, and for those who are, do whatever you do, is just get involved with as much as possible. When I was on the STFC grad scheme, I arguably said yes to too many things, but I don't regret it, because it gave me so much to not only on the very practical paperworky side talk about for my rebanding, but also to genuinely build upon the skills I now have that I wouldn't have had if I wasn't stressing over this, that, the other, developed as a person. So I think that is just within reason, of course, to just say yes to as much as you can do. And for those not already within the sector, don't stress about it. You'll get it if it's what you want. You will find a path, and you actually don't stress.
I agree. I think the being positive, saying yes to things can get you a huge amount in terms of being seen to be positive, optimistic. People want to work with people who are kind of in that enthusiastic space. So definitely volunteer for things, but also volunteer for things because it's great for the CV. Having internships and experience puts you so much further ahead than candidates going for the same job. So saying yes to things, getting those CV points, getting those internships that give you like a huge kind of advantage on your competitors.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, just on that, because I have been in the position where I have reviewed CVs for graduate roles and stuff as well, is that yes, again, because internships and things like that are very competitive. Never rule out the fact that if you have real world experience, if you've literally worked in a shop, you've literally worked in catering, you've literally done all of that. That's something when I look at a CV that I actually find really real world valuable compared to, a dozen different technical projects you were maybe involved in. Sometimes at the end of the day, getting on at work, getting on your career comes down to being a very agreeable and nice person. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be super relevant to a key area. You never know the areas you will get skills for. I was a part-time waitress for 5, 6, 7 years since I was at school till I graduated uni. And sometimes when I'm running about site supporting a visit, like the skills I am drawn on were from when I was a waitress, not from when I was doing my aerospace engineering degree. So just wide, as well as all those fantastic internships and projects, be widely experienced.
But never say super.
Ever.
I have got a lot of recommendations, but I don't want it to come across as being really preachy. But it's the two things I think I would really recommend, and just to kind of foster and understand, is that your network is more than it's worth a weight of gold, right? The people who you grow up with, who connect with and communicate with on a day-to-day basis, your colleagues, the people you work with, who you consider as your peers, they will be the leaders of space companies in the future, right? You all will progress through your space career or through your careers, and you will find that the people who you are drinking with down the pub, throwing up with in the gutter will be the kind of the head of a space agency. And it is incredible that those people you will consider to be friends will also be in high power positions. So foster your network, collaborate whenever you can, and grow it as much as you can.
That's
No, I've got way more. They've just all fallen out of my head again. So I'll just pass on to Jacob.
Okay, no worries. Last but not least, what's left to say? I think we demand actually this of companies and that we want to support or academics we want to work with, but I suppose it literally at the end of the day applies to anybody, which is being genuine. I think a lot of that, I need to get involved with like as much things as I can, and I need to be really good at my degree, and I need to connect a lot. Really try and find what your kind of unique selling points are, and that might change over time. It might not be the same for those of you that might be at uni or masters, PhD, on all the way to grad and beyond. And I'm sure mine will change too. But I think it's in an era where anyone has access to, again, we've talked about this, AI and kind of the minimum basic, and you can craft a really compelling delving into cover letter for a job advert that honestly they all sound the same. It's really trying to find what makes you genuine, what still makes you human, and what makes you you. And there'll be a lot of rejections. I think everyone faces this, certainly at the grad level. I agree with Alan, you're past that step, but I think it might just get worse from here, or depending on how ambitious someone is. But it's really about thinking whatever rejection you get, that was not a fit for you. If you are genuine and if you stay true to who you are, whatever you don't get, maybe it truly wasn't for you. So I think that's definitely something quite at the top. But I agree with everything that's been said. Try and get involved with all things that you can, and that is not just, or even from the working side, it's not just trying to get into the kind of the VIP circles. You are shaping, as Hugh was saying, your VIP circle as you are just at the back, or like talking to your peers. That's where the connections are truly built, not with people with the grown-ups, so to speak, already. Hope you don't take any offense from that, Alan. It's and I think that's actually something quite important to realize, because I completely agree with that. It's whether leaders or not of the space agencies or not, if there's a UK space agency by then, jokes aside, it truly will be the people that you have that's around you, and that will eventually become the support network, whether they are kind of on those leadership positions or not. And there are lots of mechanisms already to do so out there. UK sets, for those that you might know, for those a bit further ahead and already past the 3 years since graduation, the Space Generation Advisory Council, they do fantastic event in the UK every year, and we really proudly sponsor it every year. There are lots of forums, but all of that is shaped. And back to Hugh's point, space is an enabler, is transsector. It doesn't matter whether you're an engineer, a lawyer, a biologist, whatever. It's having that kind of cross-disciplinary mindset that will truly make someone successful in this sector, I think. And that also comes with with soft skills and hard skills on both sides. So it's just that unique mix that again will truly make you generate and will position you for whatever is to come.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Joaquin, Hugh, Jessica, Alan, thank you all very much. Let's have a big round of applause. Super. That's going to bring us to a close. Now, I just want to say a few things before we head on out. It was mentioned earlier today, so I thought I'd say it now. The STFC's early career opportunities are open right now. So we currently have a huge array of STFC graduate and industrial placement opportunities. The STFC graduate scheme is a 2-year course, and there's positions available across all the different departments that you might have heard of today, in technical and not technical roles. The industrial placement is usually taken as a year in industry, but can just be done as a standalone year. That is more of an introduction to STFC. That is a fixed term contract, and is usually within a certain department. Both of those opportunities have got lots of training and skills development as part of it, alongside the technical work that you do with STFC. The big thing is that these opportunities close in 4 days. So if you want to apply for a September 26 starts, get your applications in by the end of the week, please. I will send a link around tomorrow morning to everybody as well. So finally, I just want to say another massive thank you to all of the speakers that we've had today, all of the poster presenters, all of the lightning talks, all of the exhibitors, and just everyone that's been able to come on side and support this event. I just want to say particularly big thank you to the volunteers that have come in and stepped up to assist around the day, and particularly to the remainder of my committee, to Dora and to James as well. So a big round of applause, please. In the morning, once we've recovered, I'll be sending out a feedback form. I would appreciate any and all feedback that you have on this event, positive, negative, just so that we can develop this event going forward. It will be a new team of early career staff that will run it next year. It could be a similar format to this. It could be something completely new. Additionally, if you are interested, give us a bell. I'm sure myself and you and everyone else will be able to support you through that. Conference badges. Please leave your conference badges either in here or in the visitor centre before you go, and we will exchange it for a lovely keepsake badge if you've not got one already. We're going to go to Dish this evening. If you've not heard of Dish before, it's a fantastic little eatery on the other side of the Harwell campus. There'll be a team of us walking across from the visitor centre in a few moments. There's a selection of hot drinks and food and various other things as well, and the bar will probably be open if you're interested. Those that are driving, don't go to the bar, but there is also a car park on the other side of site. You may find it more beneficial to drive over to walk. That's it. Thank you all again for coming. I can't quite believe it's the end of the day. It's been a very interesting few months putting this together, and just thank you all for coming along and making it so special.